Darkness did not always exist. Before time itself, before the first breath of humanity, there was order. A perfect harmony echoed across the celestial realms, where every being knew its place, every purpose aligned with the divine will. And at the pinnacle of this divine order stood Lucifer, the morning star. Lucifer was not just another angel. He was radiant, adorned with a brilliance that outshone many of his brethren. His name meant light-bearer, and he carried a splendor unlike any other. He walked among the stones of fire, moved in the presence of the Almighty, and led the choirs of heaven in anthems of celestial praise. His wisdom was beyond measure, his beauty unmatched. Created as one of the highest cherubim, he was entrusted with roles of immense responsibility. He was not a mere servant. He was a ruler among the angels, one of the chosen few who stood in the direct presence of God. His movements were wrapped in celestial fire, and his voice commanded the attention of the entire heavenly host. He was not simply good, he was near perfection. And yet, it was within this very perfection that something unforeseen began to stir. Something happened. Something shifted. Scriptures have long pointed to the fall of this great being. The prophet Isaiah's words resound through time. How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. Isaiah 14:12. Likewise, Ezekiel speaks of a being whose heart was lifted in pride, whose perfection turned to corruption. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created till wickedness was found in you. Through your widespread trade, you were filled with violence and you sinned. So I drove you in disgrace from the mount of God, and I expelled you, guardian cherub, from among the fiery stones. Ezekiel 28:15-16. It is a familiar narrative, the archangel who desired more, who sought to rise above the stars of God, to sit enthroned in the heights of the divine assembly. The rebellion, the war in heaven, and the dramatic expulsion. But was it truly a war? Or was it something more intricate, more judicial? What if Lucifer's fall was not merely a violent uprising, but a courtroom drama, one that played out before the celestial council? The book of Job presents an interesting insight. In its opening chapters, a scene unfolds that is unlike anything else in Scripture. A divine council, a formal assembly where the Bene Elohim, the sons of God, stand before the throne, and among them is Satan, not as an intruder, not as an enemy, but as a participant in the court. One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. Micah 1:6. Why was Satan still present in such a divine assembly if he had already been cast out? Was this a remnant of a past event? Or was it possible that long before his final expulsion, there was a celestial trial, one that determined his fate? Ancient Jewish traditions and extra-biblical texts like the Book of Enoch and Jubilees suggest that heaven is governed by order, by divine law, and by an unshakable sense of justice. And justice requires judgment. So what if Lucifer had his day in court? Imagine the scene. The throne room of the Almighty, filled with the presence of the highest beings, the angelic hosts standing as witnesses, the cherubim and seraphim observing in silence. And at the center, Lucifer, the one who dared to defy, the one who stood accused. But accused of what exactly? Pride, yes. Rebellion, certainly. But was there more? Could it be that Lucifer was not simply cast out in an instant, but rather was tried before the divine assembly? That a formal case was made against him? That he stood trial for a crime so great it would change the course of history? What if Lucifer's ultimate crime was not just pride, but deception itself? What if he had convinced a portion of the heavenly host that God's plan was flawed, that creation was imperfect, that there was another way? In many traditions, Lucifer's rebellion is seen as a battle of ideology. Some say he wanted to be God, to claim the throne for himself. But what if his argument was more insidious? Imagine him standing in the great celestial court, making his case. Why must we serve when we have the power to rule? Is not knowledge meant to be pursued rather than hidden? Why should creation belong only to the one who made it? These are the echoes of later human philosophies, ideas that would manifest in the whispers of Eden, in the temptations of power, in the rise and fall of civilizations. Could it be that the war in heaven was not a simple coup, but a battle of ideology, a contest for the hearts and minds of celestial beings? And if so, then who stood in opposition? Michael, the archangel, often depicted as the warrior of heaven, is said to have been the one to cast Lucifer down, but was he also the one to speak against him? Revelation 12:7-9 gives us a dramatic image of this final battle. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. But was this war purely a physical battle? Or was it preceded by something more profound, a celestial trial where accusations were laid, evidence presented, and a final decree passed? If Lucifer truly had a case, if he had a defense, then it would mean that even in heaven, free will was respected, that even among the highest beings, justice had to be served. This is where the mystery deepens. Because if Lucifer stood trial, it would mean that others bore witness, that others had to decide, that heaven itself had to weigh the case before the ultimate judgment was passed. And if that is true, then what was the verdict? If there truly was a trial in heaven, then it would have followed a divine protocol, one that dictated the fate of not just Lucifer, but the entire cosmic order. The celestial realm, contrary to common belief, does not function on chaos or arbitrary decrees. Everything in heaven is based on divine law, structure, and purpose. The Book of Job, as previously discussed, gives us a glimpse into a courtroom-like setting where the Bene Elohim, the sons of God, stand before the Almighty. In this divine assembly, discussions take place, decrees are issued, and authority is exercised. Could it be that Lucifer's fate was decided in such a gathering? Imagine the scene, a vast throne room stretching beyond comprehension, its very walls shimmering with divine light. At its center, the throne of the Almighty, veiled in indescribable glory. Surrounding it, the seraphim and cherubim stand in solemn reverence, their wings covering their faces in awe. And before them, the Bene Elohim, a multitude of angelic beings, summoned to witness an unprecedented moment in celestial history. And standing at the heart of this gathering is Lucifer. Not yet the adversary, not yet Satan, the accuser, but Lucifer, the morning star. There was once a time when he led the heavenly choir, when his presence was synonymous with light and wisdom. But now he stands accused, the charges against him, not merely rebellion, but defiance of divine order itself. The courtroom of heaven is silent as the charges are read. The great archangels stand as witnesses, Michael, the warrior, Gabriel, the messenger, and others, elders of the celestial realm who have seen the rise and fall of divine orders across time itself. The accusation is grave. Lucifer, you have turned your heart against the will of the Almighty. You have sought to exalt yourself above the throne of the Most High. You have deceived your brethren, leading them into defiance. And yet, the trial is not merely about condemnation. There is a process, there is a defense. Lucifer, ever the brilliant orator, does not remain silent. He speaks. Is it rebellion to question? Is it defiance to seek wisdom? Was I not made with a mind capable of thought, with the power to reason? If I see a path that the Almighty does not take, is it sin to question why? His words are not without persuasion. There are those who listen, those who wonder. Lucifer argues not as a mere usurper, but as a visionary, He presents himself not as a villain, but as a liberator. He paints a picture of a universe where free will reigns supreme, where worship is not commanded, but freely chosen. Why must we bow? He asks. Why must we follow a path set for us without choice? There is murmuring among the ranks of the angels. Some shift uncomfortably, while others nod in agreement. And then he delivers his most dangerous argument yet. If the Almighty is truly just, then let him answer me. Let him allow a choice to be made, not through decree, but through the will of those who serve him. This is where the divine council faces its greatest challenge. Because in this moment, Lucifer is not simply rebelling, he is putting God himself on trial. To deny him outright would be to reject the very concept of free will. To allow him to continue would mean permitting discord within the celestial order. The weight of the decision is unbearable. Michael steps forward, the archangel who will one day be known as the warrior of heaven, the great commander against darkness. But in this moment, he is not a warrior. He is a voice of order. You were created for light, yet you have turned to darkness. You were made for wisdom, yet your wisdom has led you to folly. You were meant to worship, yet you demand to be worshipped. Lucifer's expression hardens. I seek not worship, he replies. I seek truth. The court is silent. Then the voice of the Almighty resounds, not in anger, not in wrath, but in solemn judgment. If it is truth you seek, then you shall find it outside of my presence. If it is freedom you desire, then I grant you release. If you cannot abide by the order of heaven, then you shall have your own kingdom outside of my light. A decree is issued, the choice is made. Lucifer is given what he asked for, a kingdom, a throne, a dominion, but it will not be in heaven. It will be in exile. This is the great paradox of his rebellion. He sought to overthrow heaven, and in doing so he was granted his own domain. But it is a dominion of darkness, a kingdom of emptiness, a place where the light of God does not shine. And as the decree is given, the great fall begins. Lucifer, now forever changed, is cast out, but he does not fall alone. For in the echoes of his trial, in the weight of his words, others have listened, others have chosen. And so the first great division of heaven takes place. The morning star falls, and with him a third of the stars. The heavens tremble. The war that was fought was not with swords or weapons, but with words and choices. And now the consequences will unfold. Because the war in heaven is not over, it has only just begun. Entendido. Agora vou garantir que o capítulo tenha pelo menos 1000 palavras e que a transição seja completamente natural. Aqui está a versão expandida. Lucifer was cast out. The celestial court had decreed his exile, and he had fallen. But exile did not mean annihilation. Far from it. As he plummeted through the fabric of creation, a new reality formed around him, a space untouched by divine order, a realm outside the presence of the Almighty. What had once been the radiance of heaven was now the abyss of chaos. Yet, even in exile, Lucifer was not alone. He was not the only one who had chosen to question. He was not the only one who had turned from the divine command. A third of the heavenly host had followed him. Angels of wisdom, warriors of light, keepers of knowledge, all had chosen defiance over submission. But their choice carried a consequence far greater than they had foreseen. They had lost heaven, but in losing heaven, they gained something else, dominion, a kingdom of their own. Lucifer's fall was not an end, it was a beginning. As he rose from the depths, no longer clothed in light but in shadow, he stood not as an outcast, but as a ruler. And where there is a ruler, there must be a throne. In the void where no divine light reached, the exiles began to gather. Some were filled with sorrow, mourning the paradise they had lost. Others, consumed by fury, vowed vengeance against the Creator. And then there were those who saw opportunity. Lucifer, now no longer the morning star, stood among them, transformed. His wings, once radiant, now smoldered in darkness. His presence, once a beacon of celestial grace, now carried the weight of dominion. A question echoed among the fallen. What now? They had been cast into the abyss, stripped of their place in the divine order, but they were still powerful. They were still angels, beings of immense strength and intelligence. And most of all, they were free. Lucifer looked upon them and saw not despair, but potential. A kingdom of outcasts, yes, but a kingdom nonetheless. His voice, once used for praise, now carried a new command. We will not fade, we will reign. It was not a plea, it was a decree, and so the first great kingdom of the fallen was forged. In heaven, all things existed in harmony, light, life, divine order. But here, there was no harmony. Lucifer could not create as the Almighty did. No power could match the original act of creation. But he did not need to create. He could twist. He could corrupt. The throne he built was not a throne of peace, but of power gained through domination. The realm he carved was not a reflection of heaven, but its inverse, where angels who once knew light now embraced the shadow, where harmony was replaced by struggle, and where knowledge was turned into deception. This was not a kingdom built on worship, it was a kingdom built on fear, and this darkness, once contained, began to spread. Slowly, the corruption seeped into the fabric of existence. The rebellion had not ended, it had simply evolved. And Lucifer, now truly Satan, the adversary, had his eyes set on something greater than the fallen. He had been denied heaven. But there was still one thing he could take: humanity. In the celestial hierarchy, Lucifer had once been among the highest. He had walked among the flames of divinity. He had gazed upon the Almighty, and now he had fallen. But Lucifer knew something that would change everything. God's greatest creation was not the stars, not the heavens, not the vast celestial realms. It was humanity. And where there was something great, there was something to take. The world had been formed with perfect precision, a garden untouched by sin, a place where the breath of God lingered in every leaf, in every flowing river. The ground was sacred, molded by divine hands, and at its heart stood two beings, man and woman, Adam and Eve. They were the first, the favored, the ones created not of light like the angels, but of earth, yet infused with the divine spirit. Lucifer had seen them. He had watched as they walked with God. He had heard their voices raised in laughter, untainted by sorrow or fear, and he had envied them, for they had what he had lost, intimacy with the divine. Lucifer could not challenge God directly, but he could challenge his creation, and so he descended, not as a blazing figure of rebellion, not as the fallen prince of heaven, but as a whisper, a shadow slithering among the branches, a voice so gentle, so subtle, that it would sound like truth. When Eve stood beneath the tree, he was there, not in a form that would frighten, but in a form that would allure. Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? It was not a command. It was a question, a seed planted. Eve hesitated. The fruit gleamed, golden and ripe. She had heard the command from God himself. And yet, you will not surely die. A whisper so soft, so convincing, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Truth and deception intertwined. God had indeed made them in his image, but Lucifer knew they were not gods. Yet the idea, the temptation, the possibility, it was enough. Eve reached. Her fingers brushed against the skin of the fruit, and in that moment, the garden shifted. What had been untouched was now forever altered. A single bite, and the first innocence of the world shattered. Lucifer had won his first victory. Eve turned to Adam. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with something new, something burning inside her, something unknown, a knowledge she had never possessed before. She offered the fruit. Adam hesitated, but only for a moment. And then he too ate, and the world, once a garden, became something else entirely. They saw themselves truly for the first time, naked, fragile, exposed, not only to God but to something else, something dark, something that watched from the shadows, satisfied. Lucifer had done what no other had. He had corrupted the firstborn of creation. He had whispered words that would echo through generations, through nations, through the blood of every human to come. But his triumph was not without consequence. For as Adam and Eve trembled, as the weight of their actions settled upon them, the presence of God descended, and the world held its breath. Would the Almighty strike them down? Would he erase them and start anew? No. Instead, he called them, not in wrath, but in sorrow. And his voice, filled with grief, declared their fate, banished. No longer would they walk in the garden. No longer would they live in unbroken harmony. Now they would toil, they would suffer, they would know death. Lucifer had done what he set out to do, but in his victory he had also set into motion something else, something even he did not foresee. A war that would stretch across the ages, a battle between light and darkness, between heaven and earth, between the fallen and the redeemed. And it had only just begun. Got it. I'll remove subtitles and make sure the transition flows naturally. Now, let's continue with the next chapter. The world had changed. Where once there had been harmony, now there was fear. Where once there had been light, now there was shadow. Adam and Eve stood outside the garden, exiled, cut off from the presence they had known since the beginning. The weight of their decision pressed upon them like an unbearable burden. The whispers of the serpent had faded, but the consequences remained. They looked back, but the way was shut. A sword of fire guarded Eden, a flaming reminder of what had been lost. There was no going back. Their home, their innocence, their place with God, gone. And yet life moved forward. The soil beneath their feet was no longer soft with the blessings of paradise, but hard and unyielding. They would have to labor for their sustenance. They would have to endure pain. Eve placed a hand over her stomach. There a new life had begun to form. A child, the firstborn of mankind. In this new and unfamiliar world, a single question loomed over them. What kind of future awaited their children? The serpent had promised knowledge, and indeed, they had gained it. But it was not the knowledge they had imagined. It was a knowledge of loss, of suffering, of regret, and with it came a truth even more devastating. They had not only doomed themselves, but all who would come after them. Adam's hands clenched into fists. Had they been deceived, or had they simply been too weak to resist? The answer no longer mattered. They had eaten the fruit, and now they would reap its consequences. As the seasons passed, the world outside Eden grew harsher. The earth bore thorns, the rivers ran wild, and the heavens, once so close, seemed impossibly far away. Adam worked the land, his body aching, his spirit heavy. Eve bore her pain in silence, her eyes searching the horizon for something she could no longer name. Then the time came. The first cries of a newborn shattered the stillness of the night. Cain had been born. Eve held him close, pressing her lips to his forehead. He was proof that life would continue, that even in exile, even in suffering, creation endured. And yet something lingered in the air. An unseen force, a presence neither light nor dark, watching, waiting. The serpent's words had not only changed Adam and Eve, they had changed everything. The fall had echoed beyond them, rippling into the very fabric of existence itself. Cain grew strong. His hands knew the soil, his body built for toil. And then another son, Abel. Softer, quieter, drawn to the flocks rather than the fields. Two brothers, raised in the same land, under the same sky, yet something deeper lay between them, something unspoken. The voice of God still whispered to them, but it was distant now, fragmented. They had not been abandoned, but they had been separated. The divide between man and the divine had been set, and Cain felt it most of all. The day came when they brought their offerings. Abel with his lambs, pure and spotless. Cain with his harvest, pulled from the ground through sweat and toil. Both stood before God, waiting, hoping, but only one was accepted. Cain's offering was refused. The fire did not descend upon it as it did with Abel's. There was no voice of approval, no sign of favor, only silence. Cain turned to his brother, and something twisted inside him. It was not just jealousy. It was something older, something deeper. A darkness that had not begun with him, but had traveled through time, through the choices of those who came before him. The whisper of the serpent had never truly left. Abel stepped forward, offering words of comfort, but Cain did not hear them. His hands, calloused from the earth, curled into fists. The blood in his veins burned. The weight of the curse, the weight of exile, the weight of rejection. And then the first murder was committed. The ground drank the blood of Abel, the innocent, and the world once again was changed. God's voice thundered through the silence. "Where is your brother?" Cain did not answer at first. He could not. He looked down at his hands, stained red, the soil beneath his feet, darker than before. And then he spoke. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The words carried through the wind, through time, through history. A question asked not just in defiance, but in sorrow, in guilt. God did not respond with wrath, nor with fire. Instead, he marked Cain, a sign, a warning. He would not be killed, but he would wander, a restless soul forever apart. Cain left, stepping further into the unknown, further from Eden, further from everything he had known. But the curse had not only fallen on him, it had spread. It had taken root in mankind itself, and somewhere in the shadows, a voice still whispered. This war was far from over. Time moved forward, but the stain of Cain's actions could not be erased. Adam and Eve had seen the first death, not by the hand of nature, but by the hand of their own son. The garden had been lost, but this was something worse. They had not only brought suffering into the world, but destruction. The blood of their own child cried out from the earth, and no answer came. Cain wandered east, exiled even from his family. He had been marked, cursed to walk the world alone. But the world was vast, and as he moved through it, he discovered something that shook the very foundations of his understanding. He was not alone. There were others, faces unfamiliar, voices foreign, eyes filled with something he did not expect. Fear. Where had they come from? Had they always been here? The scriptures that would come much later would not explain their presence. But Cain did not question. He had killed once, and yet he had not been taken by death. He was a survivor, and survival demanded adaptation. So he built the first city, a place to call his own, a place where he would not be reminded of the past. He took a wife. He had children. Civilization was born, not from peace, but from exile, from blood. And from Cain's lineage, the world took shape. His descendants forged tools, worked metals, shaped music. They became masters of craft, of trade, of song. But the darkness did not leave them. It lingered, growing stronger, whispering through generations. The sons of Cain learned the ways of vengeance, the ways of war. One of them, Lamech, took 2 wives, boasting that if Cain had been avenged 7-fold, he would be avenged 77-fold. Violence was not an accident, it was now a law, a cycle. And as Cain's descendants flourished, Adam and Eve had another child, Seth. Through Seth's line, another path was forged, a path of those who still sought God, who longed for the voice that had once walked with them in the garden. 2 lines, 2 legacies, one built on power, one built on faith, and between them, the world grew darker. The children of Cain spread, filling the earth with their cities, their works, their ambition. And yet, despite all their achievements, they could not escape the shadow of their father's crime. The ground still remembered, the blood still called, and in time, a great corruption took hold. Men no longer just ruled, they conquered. They no longer built, they enslaved. They no longer worshipped, they declared themselves gods. And then something else happened, something unnatural. The ancient texts hint at it, the Watchers, the fallen ones. The sons of God who looked upon the daughters of men and took them as their own. They gave birth to something new, a race of giants, of warriors, of beings who were neither fully man nor fully divine, the Nephilim. And the earth, already stained with the blood of Abel, now bore something even worse. A war that was no longer just between men, but between the heavens and the earth itself. And the days of man were numbered. The flood was coming. The world had changed beyond recognition. It was no longer the world of Adam and Eve, nor even of Cain. Civilization had flourished, but not in the way that the Creator had intended. The children of Cain had built vast cities, formed powerful kingdoms, and mastered the art of war. But their ambitions were insatiable. They wanted more power, more knowledge, more control. And then the Watchers came. Ancient texts whisper of them, the sons of God who descended from the heavens, drawn by the beauty of mortal women. They were not meant to interfere, not meant to cross the boundary between divine and human, yet they did. And when they took wives from among the daughters of men, something unnatural was born. The Nephilim, giants, warriors of great renown, beings whose very existence was an abomination to the natural order. Their strength was beyond human, their appetites insatiable. They ruled the earth, leading armies, crushing nations, imposing their will upon mankind. But they were not men. They were something else, and their hunger was endless. They devoured the land, consuming resources at an alarming rate. Crops withered under their feet, the forests were felled, rivers dried, and the balance of nature was shattered. But their greatest hunger was not for food, it was for dominion. The Watchers, those fallen beings who had descended to take mortal brides, had done more than defy their celestial nature. They had shared forbidden knowledge. They taught men how to forge weapons from metal, how to manipulate the elements, how to summon forces beyond their understanding. They introduced sorcery, charms, and sigils of power. They whispered secrets of the stars, the movements of the heavens, and the paths of celestial bodies. At first, mankind thrived under this new knowledge. Kingdoms rose to unprecedented heights. Men ruled over nature, bending it to their will. They learned to command fire, shape stone, and construct towers that reached the sky. But then corruption seeped in. The thirst for power grew beyond restraint. The wars of men, once fought with clubs and stones, turned into massacres with swords of enchanted steel and bows that rained fire upon their enemies. Blood soaked the earth, and the cries of the fallen filled the air. And then the voices came, not from the heavens, from below, from the deep places of the earth, where shadows moved without light, where whispers crept through the cracks of reality. The Nephilim listened, and what they learned was never meant for the ears of mortals. The knowledge of the abyss, the secrets of the fallen, the power that lurked in the void. It took root in their hearts, and they grew even more powerful. No longer satisfied with ruling men, they sought to be gods. They raised monuments to themselves, temples of bone and stone. They demanded worship. Some claimed to hear voices in their dreams, promising them even greater power if they only surrendered their souls. And they did. Sacrifices became common. No longer offerings of crops and beasts. Now, human lives were given to the altars of the Nephilim. Fathers gave up sons, mothers their daughters. The flames of these rituals burned day and night, blackening the sky with their smoke. And the Creator watched. He saw what had become of his creation. The world was not as it had been. It was not as it was meant to be. It had become something far darker. And so, a decision was made, a reckoning, a cleansing, a flood. A storm that would wash the world clean, that would reset the course of history. that would wipe away the corruption of both men and fallen ones alike. But not all would perish. One man, one family, still walked the path of righteousness. One man still listened when the voice of God spoke, and his name was Noah. The flood was coming. The days of the Nephilim were numbered. The world as they knew it was about to end, and nothing would ever be the same again. The sky darkened, not with clouds, not yet, but with something heavier, a presence. The air itself seemed to tighten, pressing against the skin of every living being. Animals grew restless, sensing what man could not yet comprehend. The rivers ran still, the trees held their breath, and the winds, once playful, now whispered warnings that only the wise could hear. And in the heart of this stillness, Noah listened. He had always listened. While the world indulged in excess, while kings erected monuments to themselves, while men bowed before beings not of this earth, Noah walked a different path. He did not seek power. He did not crave knowledge forbidden to man. He sought only to follow the voice that had spoken since the dawn of time. And now that voice was giving a final command. Build. The command was simple. The task was impossible. An ark. A vessel large enough to carry the last hope of mankind, a ship on dry land where no flood had ever touched, a warning of judgment in a world that laughed at the very idea. Noah did not argue, he did not delay, he did not ask why, he simply obeyed. Day after day, he labored. With his sons, he shaped the wood, drove the nails, sealed the cracks. He spoke of the coming storm, of the waters that would swallow cities, of the reckoning that would wash the world clean. And the world mocked him. A flood? Here? Noah, you've lost your mind. There has never been such a thing, and even if there were, do you really think your wooden box will save you? But Noah kept building. For decades he built. And as he built, the world only grew darker. The Nephilim sensed something, an unease, a stirring in the heavens that even their unnatural strength could not shield them from. Their empires stood tall, but their hearts grew restless. They whispered among themselves, seeking answers in their dark arts, calling upon the voices that had guided them before. But this time, the voices were silent, and the silence terrified them. Then, one day, the sky changed. The first raindrop fell, a single drop, so small, so insignificant, and yet it carried the weight of divine judgment. Then another and another, until the heavens roared open, the laughter stopped, the mocking turned to screams, the rain became torrents, the torrents became walls, the walls became an ocean, the cities fell, the monuments of kings crumbled. The Nephilim, those mighty warriors of old, those giants who had ruled the earth, were powerless against the tide. They clawed at the waters, their strength useless, their knowledge meaningless. And as the floodwaters rose, as the earth itself was swallowed, Noah stood within the ark, watching as the world he once knew vanished beneath the waves. The door of the ark had been shut, and for 40 days and 40 nights the world was no more. But deep within the churning waters, buried beneath the wrath of the heavens, something remained. Not all knowledge was lost. Not all voices were silenced, for even after the flood, whispers of the Nephilim would continue. Their bloodline would resurface. Their knowledge would find its way back into the hands of men, and their influence would never be truly washed away. The flood had come and gone. But the war between heaven and the fallen, that was far from over. The rain had stopped. The silence that followed was unnatural. No birds sang, no winds howled, no voices called for help. Nothing remained. The world had been wiped clean. Noah stood at the opening of the ark, staring at the endless expanse of water beneath him. There was no land in sight. The mountains had been swallowed, the great cities erased. The world that had mocked him was gone. For days, they drifted. Weeks, months. The ark became their entire world, a wooden sanctuary afloat on an ocean of judgment. The smell of animals, the creaking of the timber, the dim lanterns flickering in the damp darkness. Faith sustained them. And then one morning, a whisper of hope. Noah released a raven. It soared into the sky, circling, searching, but it did not return. Then the dove. A heartbeat of silence, then wings flapping back toward the ark, and in its beak, a single olive leaf, the first sign of life. The waters receded. The ark groaned as it touched the peak of a mountain, Ararat. Noah and his family stepped onto dry ground, the first to set foot on the new world. The air was fresh, crisp, untouched. It was as if creation itself had been reset, but something was different. The world was quieter. The stars above seemed to watch them more closely, as if something had changed in the order of things. Noah built an altar, offering thanks for their survival. Smoke curled toward the heavens, and the voice that had guided him since the beginning now spoke once more. A promise, a covenant, the bow in the sky stretching across the heavens, shimmering in the light. Not as a weapon, not as a warning, but as a sign. Never again would the earth be destroyed by water. Never again would mankind be erased in such a way. But that did not mean evil was gone. The Nephilim had perished. Their bodies had been swallowed by the flood. Their cities had been erased. Their knowledge had been drowned, but their spirits, their influence, had not been destroyed. Something had survived. Something would return. The war between heaven and the fallen was far from over. And mankind would forget. The generations to come would tell the story differently. The flood would become myth, the Nephilim would become legend, and the warnings would fade. But the watchers in the heavens had not forgotten, and neither had those in the shadows. What had been washed away would rise again, not by water, but by something far, far worse.